Director for Entertainment and Lifestyle. I wanted to know, how did you feel about the new series coming out, the Great Allotment Challenge?
The Great Allotment Challenge, Ben, is quite an exciting thing to happen because you know you've had the Great Bake Off and the Great Sow Off, but this one combines three different elements. It combines growing plants, it combines showing plants, and then what you can do with plants, like in decorations, flower arranging, and finally to make preserves and chutneys. So we're hoping there's a little bit for everybody.
Other than having the contestants grow their own food, how are you going to make this competition different from the others like the Great British Bake Off?
Well, I think the fact that we're actually educating people as we go along. So when we go round the plots, we're looking at what they're growing and we're saying, why didn't you do that? Wouldn't it have been a good idea if you'd have done that? And hopefully giving them tips on how to garden when they get back home to their own plot. And that way, the public will be able to pick up ideas themselves. Likewise, when they were judging the preserves and the floral decorations, my two co-judges were doing the same as me. They were giving useful hints and tips, not only for the people that were doing it, but all, hopefully, million viewers that are going to watch it.
As the judge of the Allotment Challenge, what are you going to keep your eye out for?
I think one of the most important things is to know what you're judging, because everything has a different criteria, everything comes different ways. So one of the first episodes, we were judging carrots. Now you've all probably eaten carrots. Well, to judge them, you have certain things you look for. Firstly, is it nice and long and straight, the actual stump of the carrot? Have they managed to keep quite a bit of the root on, because it wants to run right the way down, not snapped off halfway through? And then are there blemishes on it? Have the little bugs and beasties been trying to eat it? And one of the things that you do for show carrots is you cut all the foliage off the top and just leave 3 inches. And then it's the way you actually arrange them. Now that may seem silly, it's only 3 carrots. Don't just plonk them on a plate, put them so that they actually look artistically right on the day. Finally, when you're actually, just before you're judging, you will brush off as much of the mud. Now you need a very, very fine brush to do it. You don't want to scour the skin of the carrot. And then you hope the judge is in a good mood.
Do you think the new series will be tough for the competitors? Why?
I think what's happened is that when the series started, people were giving a plot of land. All there was a marked plot or allotment, and they had a greenhouse to go with it. Then it was up to them how they produced the stuff that was needed for us to judge later in the series. Now you know as well as I do, when you're working outside, the one thing you can't beat is nature. Is it going to be too hot? Is it going to be too wet? And then, in nature as well, where are all the bugs and beasties? So all of these elements have to be taken into consideration ever before you start thinking, I've got 3 prize-winning carrots or whatever else it is. And the other interesting thing was the way they actually designed their allotments. Now you've probably seen the normal allotment, it's just straight rows, lots of it. Well, some of them put lots of paths in and curves, some put pretty flowers in. One lady gardened by the stars. Now that was her choice, it wouldn't have been mine, but she used the stars to decide when she was going to sow the different crops, and then hoped by doing this sort of very natural way the bugs and the beasties weren't going to go near there. Well, they don't understand gardening by the stars, they did as much damage as... But everybody came with a different angle, so each plot, although it's all about growing and showing, had something different for the public to see.
Do you think people will start to grow plants and vegetables in their garden due to the next show?
Well, that is one of the things we're hoping for, Ben, because what has happened in the last few years, there's been a tremendous surge in the amount of people that are growing their own. You may recall a gentleman by the name of Jamie Oliver, a famous chef, and he was very, very upset about what the schools were giving you to eat at lunch. It didn't have all the right carbos in it, it didn't have this, that and the other. And he made a big thing about it, and it took off. And as a result of it, people then thought, well, why don't we do it ourselves? So people were either gardening at home and growing their own veg. Because there's no doubt about it, however good it looks from a supermarket, it will never taste the same as when you've dug it out of your own garden and cooked it 5 minutes later. So we're hoping this will continue the enthusiasm that people have got for growing their own. The other thing is that most of the local shows, the flower shows, you may have been to them, that are run by the different places. They may have one here in Dartford, a Horticultural Society. They are desperate for new members. And twice a year they'll have a spring show, and then they will have a summer show. And the trouble is that there's always a few, dare I say, really good experts that grow it, and everybody's no good going in. Fred always wins it. Well, that's not my attitude. Taking part is the important thing. And I remember as a little boy, I was 7 years old, and my dad took me to the local show where I lived in Haywards Heath, and I got a commended certificate. I didn't get first, I didn't get second, I didn't get third, I didn't get highly commended, I got commended. As far as I was concerned, Ben, that was a first-class certificate, and it started me off on that enthusiasm for gardening.
Could you tell us a little about being awarded the Victoria Medal of Honour in 2006?
The Royal Horticultural Society, the biggest gardening charity in the world, they're a bit like the AA that run all the car breakdowns and everything, or the RAC. The Royal Horticultural Society virtually run and dominate horticulture in this country. They provide education for young people to learn about gardening. They do lots of research into the different crops, pests and diseases. They've got wonderful gardens around the country. They have Wisley down near Guildford, which is a show garden people go to visit to get ideas, and several others. And the RHS Council that runs it, and these are very, very eminent ladies and gentlemen that have had a lifetime in horticulture, meet twice a year to decide who they think should deserve a medal for services rendered to horticulture. Now, the first medal I got was the Associate of Honour of the Royal Horticultural Society. There are only 100 people hold it at any one time. When I fall off the perch, my name will stay on the plaque, but somebody will get my medal. So I was very honoured, very flattered when I look at the list of people that have got it. And then, a few years later, I could not believe that I'd been awarded the Victorian Medal of Honour. There are only 63 in the world, and those medals are given by the RHS to people who've given distinguished service, whether it be in education, whether it be in parks, gardening, generally have given their life to gardening. Why there's only 63? Because it's named after Queen Victoria, who reigned for 63 years. And I, like people like Alan Titchmarsh, which you must have heard of, lots of other people, it was one of the proudest days of my life to receive what the RHS regard is the highest medal they could award in horticulture.
What type of judge are you going to be like?
Well, you may have read some of the brief, and I got described at one of the places I went to as Judge Dread. And they all said, here comes Judge Dread. I had a long face, and I was supposed to be nasty and intimidate people. You can see the way I'm talking to you, I don't work like that. Don't patronise people, tell them the truth, but you can do it with a smile on your face. So one of the things that came across, hopefully, and when you see the programme, is that at the same time being professional, you've got to be human. Don't hurt people and say, well, that wasn't very good, I know, Jim, I know. That's the way to do it.
What made you want to get into growing plants?
As a very little boy, I didn't like going to school. I didn't like being in a classroom, and I didn't like being told what to do by teachers. And so I wasn't a very good pupil. And when I got to 15 and a half, the headmaster said to my father, this boy should be outside, not in a classroom. So I wasn't exactly expelled, I left school, because all I've ever wanted to do, right from a nipper, is garden. And that started me off. I had to go out and get a job, and so from 15 and a half, and I'm now 69, I'm still gardening, and I love it. I love it. I'm a great believer in people that are happy are people that enjoy what they're doing. And how many people can boast a hobby that I had as a little boy has paid me a living?
People say you're on the new Paul Hollywood from Great British Bake Off. How do you feel about that?
I couldn't believe, I think that's a kiss of death, Ben. I mean, it was somebody having a bit of a wind-up. I do a lot of radio work. I work for the BBC Radio Surrey, Sussex and Hampshire, and the voice is important on radio. I always say I've got the voice for, the face for radio, and it's my voice that'll get me through. They don't know what I look like, they don't want to know what I look like, but the voice gets them going. And I've been described as Bob Hoskins, Ray Winston, Inspector Wexford. One lady thinks I look like Steptoe, another lady thinks I look like Noddy Holder, whatever they want to think. And so when this one came up, I thought, Paul Hollywood, well, if it sells the programme, because that's what it's about, good luck to them.
Will the programme have challenges to test the contestant skills?
The idea was that these people arrived on their allotment in March. So as I said, it was just a bare patch of earth and the greenhouse. It was up to them to decide how they were going to plan it out, what they were going to grow. Yes, they had a clue in my case. I'd set them tasks each week that I was going to judge. Carrots, runner beans, various things like that. They also knew they had to grow a variety of vegetables that would be needed for a chutney or a cordial. So they got a rough idea of it. And then it was up to them, week by week by week, to plot it and decide what they're going to do. When we got to the judging date, that's when His Lordship came along with a gentleman called Jonathan Mosley, who was a floral arranger, and a lady called Thane Prince, who was a preserve expert. And it was their job to judge what was ever put in front of them. So they knew they were going to be judged on whatever I was shown, and likewise the floral arrangement, and equally the chutneys and the cordials. And then at the end of it, the 9 have put them out. We had then to decide, each individually in our own right, which was the best in show. So I'd walk up and down, I'd judge them with the criteria I told you earlier, and then eventually I'd say, and the best in show is. Then they go and do the floral arrangement, and the same thing again, the best in show is. Didn't have to be the same person, it was split up, and then finally for the preserves. So at the end of the first episode, the 3 judges had to sit down and decide who was going out the series. Were they good enough? Did they really understand it? Were they keen, and what have you? So there's a bit of debate there. It all adds up the tension for the people watching, and then finally 2 couples left. And that went right the way the 6 episode to the 5 episodes, and then the 6th one we had 3 left, going to be the best allotment growers in the show.
Hello, I'm Martin, Science and Environment Editor, and I'm going to ask a bit more on the science aspect of things. And first of all, with genetically modified food becoming more and more popular, not only in the media but also in the stores, what negative effects can we start to see in plants and flowers, if any?
One of the problems is that people worry about is by doing all this genetic modification is you don't clone everything. And if you do, you can suddenly get some offsprings that you don't really want. So I personally, I don't take too kindly to it. But that doesn't mean to say that it's wrong and everything else. But the problem is, if you start messing around with nature too much, you know who's going to win, nature.
And in your opinion, do you think that fruit or vegetables that have been genetically modified can harm people?
There's nothing to prove it does. I don't think so. They wouldn't be doing it if it was going to harm people. You could think of examples where they brought out various medicines and they've had some terrible side effects. But to date, I haven't heard anybody that's been affected by genetically modified carrots.
As biomass a source of fuel for energy, do you believe that it could become a reliable energy source for the entire world and for the future?
Well, I think that it's a very wide-searching subject, is it not? And the problem is we've been guilty in the past of chopping this down, doing that just to keep going, and then suddenly we find that we're depriving ourselves of a lot of natural areas. In particular cases, I can remember going to Madagascar a few years ago and to see where they just constantly chop down the trees. Now, the reason they did it, because that was their only form of earnings. Having said that, it's more importantly to find a way in which we can not mess around with nature, but provide work and money for the people that live there. So it's a balancing act, in my opinion, and all we can do to protect our world and keep it is very important. So I'm a great believer in the biomass, the recycling, all these various things that people are doing, and a lot of it is now being done in schools with young people. So right from a young child, they're knowing what should be protected, what should be saved, what should be not thrown away. So I'm all for it, absolutely.
So will that lead you to believe that organic products, fruit and veg, have more benefits than normal varieties?
Well, you see, the trouble is it's a very emotive subject. People will have been eating veg the way they've grown them for years and don't seem to have suffered side effects. And you'll always get something not new come along, but organic gardening is sort of still in its infancy. I must admit that I find it hard to see any difference between that and what is grown the normal way. But if people feel better by it and people want to do it, well, why stop them? I can't see, I mean, things now people are saying is, why does everything have to look the same in a shop? All the tomatoes look the same, all the carrots are the same size. They look as if they've been through a washing machine 24 times. Now people are saying, why can't we have a bit of dirt in the spuds when we buy them and so on? So it's all, you know, people have their opinions, things come in, things go out. But if that's what people like doing without using chemicals, and there has been a desperate waste and misuse of certain chemicals. I mean, people have been affected by it, as we know, and so has the ground, so have plants. So it needs control. It needs to be balanced, though. Sometimes these things take off at an angle and everybody says, well, if you don't all do this, we'll all, you know.
So how do you think we could further popularise using organic products and balancing the amount of chemicals we use in our foods?
Well, I think going back to what I said before, you always want to start with young people. It's no good at asking old people, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way. They're set in their ways, well, we never used to do that, what's all this about? But young people now are being educated in it, they're learning about it, they're doing it in the classroom, they're doing it in their playgrounds where they've created gardens and everything else. They are the future. And by getting that mass of young people and young mothers and young fathers getting their way and doing this sort of thing, I think it will, of course it will catch off. But, you know, going back in generations, you know why people had allotments. There were two reasons. First of all, a lot of working class. We had an industry in this country once called shipbuilding, called coal mining, called steelworks and so on and so forth. And these people worked jolly, jolly hard. Horrible, dirty conditions, and their freedom was to spend their time on their allotments. And the reason they did that was, first of all, because it was fresh air, it was away from the mine, it was away from the shipyard, but secondly, it provided a very valuable source of income to them. They didn't have a lot of money, they had big families, and so the families were fed on that. Equally, a lot of people used to call them pleasure gardens. People lived in coronation-style rows of houses with the toilet outside, with just a bit of a yard, nowhere to enjoy or anything. So the allotment became a pleasure area. The children could go and play there, Dad could sit there and talk to his mates. So they've been around for a long, long time. And I think that long may this trend continue of people coming back into gardening. Now, as I said earlier, whether it be organic, whether it be the normal way, people in those days didn't have all these organic things around. They just got them perfectly all right.
On a more further note, there's been recent news that bees seem to be abandoning their colonies and many have been dying off around the world. What effects would this have, not only in horticulture, but worldwide, what we eat, what we do?
Well, the thing about it is this is the reason why you've been asking these questions. Because people have been doing a lot of this growing plants genetically in different ways, and they don't have the pollen, the qualities that the bee is looking for. Equally, the weather patterns have been changing dramatically. We get very cold springs. Bees don't like coming out in the cold. Equally, a lot of the hedgerows, places where they will stay and what have you, they've been destroyed. We're suddenly realising that all the habitats and all the places where they live, we've taken away. Now the problem is that equally there are several pest diseases, and as you know, bees are suffering from a particular problem at the moment. And maybe in some ways it's a bit late, but people are suddenly aware that they've got to take this into account. They just can't close their eyes and say, oh, well, it's a blip, it'll go away. So people are much more aware. You'll see more talk about people starting up beehives. Allotments have them. Schools have them. And the other thing too is look at the amount of programs now. Countryfile is a great example where everybody is being more educated in what nature's about. Because if we don't do it, what you originally said, we'd be in an awful lot of trouble. Bees are the absolute essential to pollination and to continued generation of plants and flowers.
Leading on to what you said about early springs, how could global warming and climate change affect plants as well?
Well, you see, this is something else that I personally, I don't know a lot about. And I'm not decrying people that say, oh, well, global warming, because if you think back through the generation, weather patterns have been very different. You've had snow in June, you've had frosts in June, you've had heavy flooding, you've had snowfalls, and everybody just thought, oh, well, it's just one of those things that happen. But there is evidence of global warming. You know, we're seeing now that wonderful man, David Attenborough, doing lots of programs, particularly about the polar bear, where all the ice caps are melting. They're just disappearing. Well, there's got to be a reason for it, but there's still a lot of research to do to find out what it is. The important thing is people are aware of it and they're trying to do something about it.
And finally, please can you settle, is the tomato a fruit or a vegetable?
Tomato is a fruit. Tomato is a fruit.